It's just 1 year, 1 month, and 10 days until the next provincial election. Yesterday, Kathleen Wynne's Liberal government brought down its second-last budget aimed at making the case for re-election. It's too soon to know how it might factor in, but we do have some pretty current information about how Ontarians view their premier and her two chief opponents, thanks to pollster Greg Lyle. He's president of the Innovative Research Group, and he joins us now with the numbers. Thanks for making the trip in from British Columbia for us here, Greg. Let's just bring a few of these graphics up here, and then we'll get you to comment on what we have. Sheldon, if you would. If the election were held today, and as we point out, it isn't, but if it were, the Conservatives would have support of 40% of the electorate, the Liberals in second at 31%, the NDP with 20%, and the Greens coming in at 8%. Who is the electorate today? Fully 1/3 of Ontarians identify themselves as Liberals. That's still the biggest group out there. A little more than a quarter identify themselves as Progressive Conservatives, 11% as New Democrats, and 3% as Greens. And let's do one more chart here. How has the Premier changed Ontario? 8% say she has changed the province for the better. 21% say the province has basically stayed the same under Kathleen Wynne's leadership. But look at this, 66% say Kathleen Wynne has changed Ontario for the worse. My question for you is that number so high and so bad that it's unmovable?
Well, the striking thing about that, and the exact question on there is, has she changed Ontario for the better or for the worse, right? So what has her impact been? And very often people say, well, you know, I can't really think of an impact, right? I mean, they're politicians and I'm busy in my life. For 2/3 to say that she's made things worse is really striking. When you look at people that are Liberals right now, 45% of the people that are currently voting Liberals say that she's changed Ontario for the worse.
Her own supporters?
Her own support. Well, people voting for her party, right? And so that's really the tension right now, that there is this big pool of potential Liberal support out there still today. People that wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and see an Ontario Liberal. But many of those people are not voting Liberal right now, and many of those people are not happy with Kathleen Wynne.
So job one for her is obviously to repatriate her own support. Right, rally the base, right, better way to put it. Following up on what you just said, Sheldon, let's go to board 4 here. Can you think of any actions or decisions by Kathleen Wynne, you ask, that you approved of or liked? And 55% of people said no, they can't think of anything that they like. 5% identified the lowering of electricity rates as something that they liked. Can you explain how more than half the people surveyed, she's been Premier for more than 4 years, they can't come up with anything they like?
Well, to a degree, this term of the Liberals has been defined by defense, right? So they've been reacting to initiatives, reacting to scandal and controversy, and part of that has been because they've been in fiscal handcuffs. Right, they've been trying to balance the budget, and that's really limited their ability to do big, bold things like the sort of things that Justin Trudeau promised in the election.
And therefore, that's why you get 55% of the people saying no.
Well, because there is no money for these good things.
Let's continue. Disapproved of anything. Can you think of any actions or decisions by Kathleen Wynne that you disapproved of or disliked? And interestingly enough, there's no sort of one overarching thing here. 14% point to the semi-privatization of Hydro One, the electricity distribution company, which they're selling 60% of. 12% just say everything. There's too many things to list. 11% point to mismanagement in general. Should the Liberals take some solace from the fact that there's no one big honkin' issue out there that's holding them back?
Well, I do think that electricity generally, at least a quarter of the public mentions electricity in one form or another. So that's definitely out there, and they've been taking some actions on that. But frankly, you'd rather have specific mistakes that you can fix than some sort of general sense that you haven't lived up to expectations. Because if there's nothing specifically you've done wrong, how do you fix it?
Let's go to the next chart here. For each of the following, now this chart's a bit complicated, but we're going to take our time to go through this. For each of the following issues, please indicate if you think Kathleen Wynne has been making things better or worse. And what we're going to do here is just look at the figures in the first column. So this is Liberals only. And you can see that on the environment, Liberals think she's done a great job on the environment. She's plus 34% there. Providing equal opportunity for all, up. Education, up. Healthcare, up a little. Jobs, up a little. This is interesting. Among Liberals, Liberals think that the finances of the province are worse because of her. The cost of living for people like me, she's below water. And on electricity, of course, which you've just pointed out is one of the big handicaps, also a significantly negative number. Here's the question. How is it possible that while she has fulfilled her commitment to present a balanced budget in the time in which she said she would do it, there's still way more Liberals who think that she's done a bad job managing the province's finances? How does that happen?
Well, I think the controversies that we've heard about, there's a lot filling the newspapers and the airwaves about waste and mismanagement, auditors' reports, controversies over contracts going out, and that gives people, electricity again has been front and center of those, but it's not just been about electricity, controversies over ads, all those sorts of things. And that leaves people saying that you have not made sure you make good use of my tax dollars before you come to me for more. And there's also a perception that on pocketbook issues, things are getting worse in a whole variety of ways.
It's an interesting set of handcuffs that she wears, because on the one hand, you've got this, where the books are back in balance, and yet you've got even Liberals saying she hasn't done a good job on the province's finances. But then you've also got special interest groups that the Liberals have sort of wanted to cater to over the years, who also think you haven't spent enough on our issues.
Right.
How do you deal with that kind of a conundrum?
Well, it is a difficult one. Politically, there's no real pressure to balance the budget, right? The pressure to balance the budget is really about financial markets, right? And that was really the trigger in the mid-90s federally, right? The federal government went to balance the budget not because they thought it was a particularly important thing, but because they couldn't keep borrowing money at the rates they were getting it without doing something to fix that situation.
Wall Street was saying, we're not going to give you any more money.
And what you saw federally, right, is that whatever negatives Trudeau got for saying I'm not going to balance the budget as quick as the NDP and the Tories were well offset by his ability to move faster than the NDP on promising social benefits.
Let's bring that, Sheldon, that chart back up again, because I want to complete the other two columns. We saw what Liberals think on those issues. Now look in the second two columns, and you'll see what New Democrats and Conservatives think of the issues that Kathleen Wynne has handled. And you see they're all minus. Just go down the NDP column, go down the Progressive Conservative column, they're all minus. Although in the top right corner, looks like only minus 10 for the Conservatives on the environment. There are some
Right.
Tories who are prepared to say she's done a good job in the environment.
Well, that may be a mixed blessing, though.
Okay.
In that they may be people that say, sure, she's done something on the environment, but it's cost me a lot of money. Right? It may be the flip side of a negative for them.
Do you see, though, in any of those numbers there, whether it's on equal opportunity or education or healthcare or whatever, is there anything in the opposition numbers which suggests people might be open to a more positive opinion of the government record if they were to do things different?
Well, no. I mean, the issue there when you look at that is that what we're seeing there is how do people that are core NDPers or core Tories react?
And they got nothing good to say.
Nothing good to say. But what's striking about that is that in a previous election, Kathleen Wynne did very well with people on the core left. The big issue as well for the Liberals, and we're not showing it right on that screen, but the people that are unaligned, those people are also very negative about her. And so her challenge is twofold. Number one, she's got to win back the base. If she can win back the base, she's actually in the game. That's all you need to do as a Liberal leader.
The center-left progressive voter.
Well, they're not necessarily all that progressive, right? It's the center voter. Let's put it that way, the Liberal. The person that thinks that we should focus on creating opportunity, not redistributing wealth, but thinks the environment is important and thinks it's more important to fund social programs than to balance the budget. That sort of person. Someone that thinks government should roll up their sleeve and get involved in the economy as opposed to someone that says set a level playing field and let companies figure it out.
Because they're going conservative.
Yeah, they're conservative. So those sort of people she needs to bring home. They want to like her. Right? If you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror and you see a Liberal, you want to like the Liberal leader. You don't want to dislike the Liberal leader. And so they're looking for excuses to come home.
Let's look at what has been a great debate, I don't know among the population, but certainly at Queen's Park, as to whether or not the Premier ought to stay and fight the next election or whether she ought to make an early departure. And again, we'll go down the columns here. I would be happy to vote Liberal with Kathleen Wynne as the leader. There are still 23% of Liberals surveyed who are on side with that. I'm willing to consider voting Liberal with Kathleen Wynne as the leader, but I need to see some changes in the way she does business. As you spoke to, Greg, a moment ago, that's more than a third of Liberal supporters. Let's keep going down. I am willing to consider voting Liberal if Kathleen Wynne resigns and they have a new leader. Okay, that's 25% of Liberals. That's a lot. I have no interest in voting Liberal in the next election at all. She's lost 13% of the base so far, right?
Right.
What sort of significant in that first column do we need to pay attention to?
Let me just start with the 23%, right? The fact that less than a quarter of people that wake up in the morning and say I'm a Liberal, say I'm happy to vote for Kathleen Wynne again, is a serious alarm.
Do they have somewhere else to go if she's the premier next time?
Well, I mean, that's right now, and we're sort of jumping ahead, but lots of those people, if they know Andrea Horwath, and they may not, like Andrea Horwath, and lots of those people don't really know Patrick Brown. And so basically there's an opportunity there for both the other parties to raise the profile of their leaders and come out with platforms that are more in the center.
We will revisit that, as you point out, as we go along. But let's put the numbers back up and look in the second column, New Democrats. You can see New Democrats for the first three values there really have, they're whether she stays, whether she goes, it doesn't really matter for them. 85% of New Democrats, the bottom number there, say they have no interest in voting for the Liberals in the next election.
Right.
Let's move to the last column. This is what Conservatives say. Hard to find. How did you find 4% of Conservatives who'd be prepared to vote for Kathleen Wynne if she stays as leader? Okay. 6% saying they need to see some change in the government. So that's sort of 10% of Tories who are open to voting Liberal again. That is a bit interesting. I'm willing to consider voting Liberal if Wynne resigns. A quarter of Tories say they would be. 45% of Tories saying they're not going to vote Liberal regardless of the next election. What do you take from those numbers?
Well, one of the things that we do need to put in context is that there are not very many people that wake up in the morning and think they're New Democrat, right? So they're about 11% of the electorate. So those people are pretty core. And again, she did wake them up in the last election, but at this point, they're feeling betrayed. They're just not seeing the improvements they're looking for. They're not seeing the improvements in healthcare and education and social services. And one of the things that we're seeing from the government is we're seeing more initiatives to appeal to that sort of person. On the Tory side...
So before you go there, so just so I understand, as a strategic route forward then, you say these numbers suggest there's not a lot of mileage in the Liberals trying to get that New Democrat voter from last time to vote for them this time?
No, but the people that are unaligned, that are on the center left, are more of an opportunity, and left Liberals, who they could lose to the NDP, they could bring back. This is all sequential, right? So the government has 14 months to get its act together in terms of the next election, 13, and it's tight. So they have to make pretty quick moves. But to start with, they want to rally their base. The next step is to go to the people that are in other parties that are open to them in terms of values and cross-pressured, right? So when you look at the Tories, right, we've talked, you talk about red Tories and blue Tories and all the different shades of Tories, right? So there are Tories that see a role for an activist government, and those Tories are open. Those Tories were scared by platforms in the past that said they were going to cut 100,000 jobs. And so the Tories have their own coalition. It is less diverse than the Liberals, but it is not all on one page.
Let's ask about the Conservative Party leader, and I found this number fascinating here, these numbers. Patrick Brown, leader of the PC party, 22% have a favorable view of him, which is good. Only 13% with an unfavorable view of him. But literally half the people you surveyed don't know who he is. Is that problematic?
Well, and it is. And the striking thing is it's been like that for 2 years. And so one of the things that you have to wonder at is that running a party is a lot like running a business. There's balance sheets and there's cash flow. The Tories have been very focused on their balance sheet. They had a big debt. They're trying to pay it all off. But the other thing to think about is cash flow. And it might have made some sense for them to spend some of the money they used in paying down the debt to do some advertising around some sort of campaign when people are outraged at the Liberals, to put Patrick Brown at the head of that parade and introduce him to people. So they haven't done that, and that creates an opportunity for the Liberals and for their allies. to get in there, and the law, there's a great old saying, right? The law of the jungle is either be eaten, the law of politics is define or be defined. Right. The question right now is who gets to define Patrick Brown?
You know, for those who worry that that 50% number is too high, I remind everybody in 1985, I think 75% of the people in Ontario had no clue who David Peterson was 6 months before the election, and 6 months later he was premier. Right. So this number is not fatal. No,
not at all. I mean, the fact is that if you compare this to the past, the big story there is that the Tories have lost their negatives, right? Mm-hmm. So that was their goal when they changed the leaders. They wanted to lose the negatives that Tim Hudak had, and they've done that, but they have to go the next step. And overall, there's more people that like Patrick Brown than don't. So they're heading in the right direction, but they need to move. Let's touch on we've touched on the premier earlier. Let's follow it up here. You have a favorable or unfavorable view of Kathleen Wynne, 23% favorable, 64% unfavorable. I don't know who the 7% of Ontarians are who don't recognize the name Kathleen Wynne. That may be another discussion for another day. But that 64%, I mean, obviously a key question here is how baked in is that number? Well, the problem with it is the amount of passion that goes with it. So 46% of Ontarians have a strongly unfavorable, very unfavorable view of Kathleen Wynne. And that passion is the problem. That's going to take some time to vent for people to work through. Are they unmovable? It's hard. It's hard, right? So I mean, these are the sort of numbers that you've seen. If you're looking for parallels, you're talking about Alison Redford, you're talking about Brian Mulroney. I mean, there's a level of anger and hostility here that's very rare in Canadian politics, and there's not much time to let people vent. I did a couple of articles for the TVO website this past week or so on something that I had been hearing a great deal more and a great deal more recently, which was the notion, suggested by many people, that the Premier's gender and sexual orientation, while perhaps not an issue in the last election that she won in June of 2014, was suddenly, because of the antipathy towards her today, becoming a bigger issue. And you know, you don't have to go on Twitter for too long to find some extremely homophobic and misogynistic comments about this Premier. I don't know if you've polled on that specifically. If you have, what have you found out? We looked at the whole same-sex issue right as soon as she became leader, because it was a big issue that you had to. That's more than 4 years ago. Then. Right. Well, but one of the things that we did there is that we looked at for instance, there's traditionally a type of liberal that is socially pretty conservative, and it's sort of like an Ottawa Valley liberal, for lack of a better term. We found those people were not voting on that. In all the verbatims we looked at, nobody said anything that had anything remotely to do with their sexual orientation. And one of the things that we've done is that we do this poll every month. And so we've got literally 18,000 people responding to our polls since the last election. And we've tracked the decline in the Liberal vote over time. And it's not happening more with men or more with women or more with young people or more with old people. She's losing every group pretty steadily over time. So I don't see any signs, either in the verbatims or in the demographic patterns, that something is going on here, even regionally. Right. I mean, she's in a point now where the Liberals are only 4 points ahead of the Tories in downtown Toronto, in central Toronto. That's amazing. I mean, that is remarkable. Okay, I've got to ask the logical follow-up, which is, are people simply too polite to tell you, yes, I have a problem with the Premier because she's a woman, or yes, I have a problem with the Premier because of her sexual orientation? No one's going to say that to a pollster, are they? Have you read comments on the internet? I sure have. They're awful. And of course, they're also anonymous on the internet. Fair enough, but they're generally anonymous in our processes, and we get lots of ugly things from time to time. I just don't see it. Maybe it's there, but I don't see it. Okay. What I see is people feeling disappointed. They were excited by Kathleen Wynne. When Kathleen Wynne became the Premier, they thought that was a breath of fresh air, that she would take a fresh look at things, and that she would shake things up. And instead, it's like she's become the defender-in-chief. That every crazy thing the Liberals do, it takes weeks and weeks and months of pressure before she'll finally say, oops, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. And people are not seeing her looking at it and taking her side, right? That's what they were hoping for. They were hoping that they were electing someone who was sharing the general direction of the Dalton-McGuinty government because they like that, but who would shake off the
stink.
Well, not the stink, but the habits, the bad habits that you pick up when you're in government of listening to people on the inside and putting your own interests first and trying to explain to people why they don't understand how hard it is to run the province.
So they feel disappointed and betrayed.
Well, that's the flip side of it, and that's where you see the anger. And so the challenge is, how do you get past that? It's not a blank slate like Patrick Brown. She has to take people that are angry and have them come to terms with that. So what we're seeing from the government is a series of announcements. But what they really need is a story, right? So new information is, they need to change people's minds, right? And to change people's minds, number one, you have to get them to pay attention, and that you do that through new information. So there's lots of new information. But you use the new information to take them on an emotional journey, where at the end of that, they can say, okay, I understand. She gets how mad I am, and she is going to do something about it. So she's tried that a couple of times, and it hasn't worked yet. So the question is whether it's going to work this time.
Let's not forget the third leader at Queen's Park, Andrea Horwath, is leader of the NDP. She has a favorable rating of 32%, unfavorable of only 18%. Nearly 3 in 10 voters don't recognize the name Andrea Horwath. She's run 2 general elections already, and this will be her third. Is that a high number?
Actually, it's quite a high awareness number for someone in opposition, right? The joke about opposition leaders is that they're the people that had the cloak of invisibility before Harry Potter found it. And you know, between elections, especially when it's a majority government, if you're the third party leader, you don't have any news value. And so her challenge is to break through in the news and to become relevant. But when people see her, they like her. And 2 elections in a row, over the course of the campaign, she's gone up in her favorables as she goes through. So she's a proven talent in terms of being able to, when the spotlight comes on her, grow in popularity. And the challenge for the NDP is, how do they react to this left-leaning agenda that we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks coming out of the Liberals, right? Rank control and all the things that are coming out now are all positions that the NDP have had consistently over time. Now, you know, after more than a decade in power, they might be able to say to voters that it's a deathbed repentance, and if you want someone that really stands for these things, vote for the people that put the pressure on them in the first place. But it's still a big challenge for them. Nonetheless, right now, if people see Andrea Horwath on TV and they see Kathleen Wynne on TV, when they see Kathleen Wynne, they want to dislike and disagree with what she says. When they see Andrea Horwath, on balance, they want to like what they're hearing and agree with what she's saying.
So let's ask the final overarching question, which is, of course, these are numbers which are a snapshot in time. They may be prescient to what happens in 13, 14 months. They may not be. So I want to ask you whether you think the results of the next election, whatever they may be, are already a foregone conclusion because the gaps in popularity that these numbers reflect are just too big.
No, they're far from it. I mean, what our poll still shows that the NDP or the Liberals have a strong base, and that they're still in the race despite the fact their leader is so unpopular. And you know, all these stories have arcs, and this may be the bottom of the Kathleen Wynne negative arc. On the other hand, Kathleen Wynne may look at numbers like these, look at what happens in the next couple of weeks, and decide that maybe someone else should take a shot at it. And if that were the case, then things could change very dramatically, very quickly. Regardless of that, there are a lot of people on the fence right now. There are a lot of people conflicted. There's a lot of answers, a lot of questions that haven't been answered. Who is Patrick Brown? What do the NDP want to do? And so there's just so much room for movement. It's an exciting time for us as pollsters.
And that's why we're glad we got you into that chair tonight here on The Agenda. Thanks, Greg Lyle.
Thank you.
That's Greg Lyle from the Innovative Research Group.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.